live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. That makes it Super Tuesday. Are you feeling super? I'm feeling super. I don't know. I've got a vote today. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know. I don't know if I want to discuss it or not. This is kind of an uncomfortable time for me. You know, I hate the primaries, and I hate them even more when I actually have to do something about them. It's just such an uncomfortable time. All right, well, we've got the future of the country to think about, so we'll be taking a tour perhaps around the country, bringing in stories that have to do with Super Tuesday. And of course, if all goes well, we'll have Joan McCarter with us at some point during today's programming. And isn't every Tuesday a Super Tuesday when that happens? I like to think so. Anyway, Daily Co's Radio is live now. I am reminded all the way from Portland, Maine, where it's pretty super today, I think, well, we're ready to go. Daily Co's Radio is live now. By the way, Bill says, please note that Kagro X, me, David Waldman, will suspend normal programming if, and perhaps only if, a time traveler drops in with the results of tonight's Super Tuesday primaries, as happened so memorably in 1920 on KDKA's Morning Speakeasy Zoo show. Everyone remembers it back then, right? Yes? All right. Well, if we do get a time traveler on hand, we will stop and check in on the results, but you're not supposed to have any results, certainly not at this point. The only result that matters is whether or not you know what you're doing, whether you voted early, whether you are handing out literature at the polls, whether or not you are littering the landscape with yard signs, which I actually enjoy. And so, no skin off my nose if you put them out there, but do remember to pick them up at the end of the day. It's nice, and I always do take note of which campaigns have left their signs up for several weeks and have not sent anyone around to collect them. I always found that very interesting. And I guess candidates that lose, maybe they feel like they don't care. But, you know, you may run for something again in the future, and you don't really want garbage with your name on it all over town. So please do the responsible thing and pick those signs up afterwards. It's worth it. And besides, you can sometimes even recycle the wood, if anyone still uses the wooden stakes, but I think everybody's kind of gone with those wire frame ones these days, mostly. I see those more than anything else. You can recycle those too, and even make your own signs in the future, and you never know when you're going to need to do that. Let's say, coronavirus takes down the internets, and you can only communicate by yard sign. Well, then you'll be sorry if you threw all that stuff out or abandoned it onto the streets. All right, much to round up today. Let's see. Everyone's talking about the internet or Twitter disseminated experiences of this young-ish Seattle-based woman, Sketchy Lady, Into the Brush on Twitter, circulating her story about how difficult it was to actually take care of take all the precautions that are recommended if you feel you have the symptoms of the coronavirus. And everyone's sharing her story about how difficult it was to actually get anyone to talk to her about getting tested. The upshot of it is no tests. Nobody knows where the test kits are. Nobody knows whether the test kits are effective. Nobody, even if they do know whether there are tests and where they are, nobody willing to test anybody unless you basically are already in the hospital suffering from the most severe symptoms, which I guess speaks to there being a test kit shortage, which I guess we all knew was going on. But it's been really interesting watching people share this story, and it has reminded me of that time back in, 2009, when I believe we all refer to him as the now disgraced or deeply troubled Alan Grayson, who used to be a member of Congress at the time, But he caused quite a stir in the sort of way that usually results in burgeoning fame, actually. Caused quite a stir in saying that the Republican health care plan, when we were busy working towards the Affordable Care Act, that the Republican alternative was a plan in which you were instructed to not get sick, but if you do get sick, die quickly. It seems sort of like that he was maybe describing a situation like this one. It doesn't just apply, or this woman's story doesn't just apply to coronavirus. It applies across the board, really, when you think about the way Republicans respond to these crises. It's not all that long of a thread. We might as well sort of run through it, but maybe you've seen it. She's just saying, I live in Seattle, which is a site of one of the clusters, I think. I have all the symptoms of COVID-19 and have a history of chronic bronchitis. Since I work at a physical therapy clinic with many 65-plus patients, age-wise, 65-plus, and those with chronic illnesses, I decided to be responsible. Sounded good, right? I decided to be responsible and to go get tested, and this is how that went. I called the Corona hotline, but was put on hold for 40 minutes and gave up. And that could be rather frustrating. Plus, you cough all over the phone. It's not good for anybody. I looked, therefore, at the CDC and Washington Public Health websites, Washington State, I'm sure. They told me to see a primary care doctor, but there's no information about testing. I called 2 primary care doctors. One told me they don't know where to get testing and that I should not seek out testing. The other told me to go to an urgent care or ER. I called the urgent care. They also had no idea where the tests are, but told me to call the hospital. I called the hospital. They do not have tests, but they transferred me to the COVID-19 hotline to, quote, answer my questions. Since I was transferred on a medical provider line, though, I actually got through. So, progress, right? The lady with the hotline was very kind and professional. That's great news. And understood my concern about my own health and those at my clinic, which is currently being sanitized, by the way, for those of you worrying about that, I guess. However, I was told I do not qualify for testing. And, of course, you would only have to worry about who qualifies for testing if there was a severe shortage of those test kits or the expense associated with them was enormous, both of which should really not be a problem at this stage, but they are. However, I was told I do not qualify for testing, right? And I was not given a timeline or information on current resources. So just, ride it out, I guess. Who does qualify? Well, those who have been out of the country in the last 14 days, and those who have had contact with one of the few people who have been tested and come up positive. That's it. That's a pretty small group. And of course, once again, if you've been out of the country in the last 14 days, as if this was a country without infection in it. And I think we probably will likely find, as some of the public health experts are speculating, will likely find in the next couple of days that there has been just undiagnosed coronavirus circulating in this country. So, we'll end up finding out that it doesn't really matter too much whether you went out of the country. Although if you really went to a super hot spot, that would certainly probably get you through. But other than that, if you have had contact with one of the few people who have gotten hold of one of these tests and come up positive, then you can get tested too. The only way, she says, I can get treated is if my symptoms get so bad I developed pneumonia or bronchitis, which is very likely in my case. Then I'll be in the ER and quarantined for several days while waiting for a test and for the results to come back. This is all incredibly frustrating because I am trying to do everything right in a system that punishes moments of, quote, weakness, like, taking days off from work. It's also scary to know that I won't be able to get help until I need life support. To sum up, this is not contained. No one knows what the F is happening. I can't work. Wash your effing hands. And then, she missed out, and she didn't realize that there was a hashtag for this, and there is, Coronavirus Seattle. So in case you're in Seattle, you can use the same hashtag if you need to. And by the way, then ends by pointing out the COVID-19 hotline. So if you're listening to the show and feeling ill, and not because of the show, but rather you think because of COVID-19, just for informational purposes, 1-800-525-0127. Usually when people recite phone numbers, they then say it again by first saying, that's 1-800-525-0127. And then now I feel like I'm supposed to say, call now, but don't call now unless you think you have the coronavirus. Anyway, don't call, as a matter of fact, it says, unless you are experiencing all symptoms, and I guess you should look those up because I can't tell you what they are, or have been exposed to a case. Leave the lines open for people who need it most. Any other questions can be answered on the CDC, WHO, or Washington public health sites, or really pretty much any state's public health site, I guess, could probably offer you some of that. Although I imagine that there are some states that think coronavirus is a hoax because the president says so. And you're out of luck if you happen to live in one of those. All right. I thought that was rather interesting, and lots of people are talking about it. It's occupying a lot of attention, so I thought I might share it with you. Let's see. Other stories. Oh, yes. I did get a note in our KITM hashtag that, we got some breaking other crazy news. I'll hold on to that for just a second, but got a note in our KITM hashtag from Brian Monroe. I did see this last night. This is not one of those stories that registered immediately with me, but I recognize the name. James Lipton, longtime host of Inside the Actors Studio, has died at age 93. I didn't see much from Inside the Actors Studio except for parodies of Inside the Actors Studio, but that's how you know you're a famous person. You can't parody non-famous people, at least not effectively. Anyway, or who don't fit some sort of character archetype anyway. So yes, sad news there, and a little report about him via CNN. So we can perhaps use that obit to remind you if you didn't catch the news earlier. But thank you for bringing that to my attention, Brian. And, he, I guess, missed the chance to vote in the primaries this time around, and it probably disturbed him to no end. I think about that from time to time, what it must be like to be involved in such a contentious election year and be anticipating your opportunity to do something about the terror that is Trump, and then worrying about dying before getting your chance, or surviving long enough to figure out whether it was effective or not. I do think about that from time to time, but I'm not 93. But, anything can happen these days. All right, let's see. Also of some interest, a story I happened to notice, and then noticed Mike Musson's comment about it this morning. And, look, Greg had retweeted it too. The news from Jennifer Jacobs. Let's open that up and get our Twitter bio on hand. Senior White House reporter for Bloomberg News. Am I allowed to say Bloomberg? Is that trademark now? Do I have to pay his campaign somehow in order to say Bloomberg News out loud? Not really sure how that works. I mean, he's a multi-billionaire. I figure you're legally obligated to pay him for something. So otherwise he wouldn't be a billionaire. Anyway, a student whose classmates met with and touched, like physically touched, I don't know if anything touches him spiritually or emotionally, but touched Vice President Pence, which is also really something I can't think seriously about doing. But anyway, this happened. A student whose classmates met with and touched Vice President Pence is now quarantined. What happened? On Friday, cadets at Sarasota Military Academy shook hands with Pence. That's touching. Who was visiting Sarasota for a fundraiser. One cadet's mom had been in contact with a coronavirus patient. This according to the Sarasota Herald Tribune. Does it make sense to read their actual article? I mean, I think that probably sums it up right there. A student's mom had been in contact with a coronavirus patient. And so I guess the worry is mom could theoretically have picked it up from this patient, could theoretically have brought it home with her, could theoretically have infected this child who is a student at the Sarasota Military Academy, and that student at the Sarasota Military Academy could have been among those who shook the vice president's hand, which would have exposed him to it. And I will say this, as long a shot as that is, this would make like the probably third or fourth world leader who has taken a prominent role in his or her country on the coronavirus and then come down with, or actually died from, the coronavirus subsequently. So I suppose it would be, like I say, par for the course here, but I don't know if it's quite that infectious. And of course, as it turns out, they give the vice president access to some pretty serious medical facilities and medical care. So I don't think that the vice president's life is in danger from any of this. But what an interesting twist that would be to all aspects of our lives, political and otherwise. Anyway, just sort of an interesting development to keep an eye on. And we might be freaking out a little bit too much if we start to actually get worried about that. But, handshaking in this situation, when we're all doing everything we're supposed to, everything we can, supposed to be doing everything we can to limit the spread of any and all germs, because it's so hard to see just by looking at your hand which germs are on it, and to tell the difference between the coronavirus and all the other things that are on your hands. But of course, if you didn't shake the vice president's hand, that would become a political incident, and you could find yourself isolated from your peers, which actually, frankly, is not really such a bad fate given what we're facing. Okay, let's see. I happened to see a story fly by that looked like it might be of some interest, just because what's going on here? I want to see the tweet from Bobby Lewis, who's working over at Media Matters, keeping an eye on what goes on in Fox World for us. What happened here? Fox News analyst Britt Hume, he likes to tell us, likes sexy vixen vinyl. Let's find out why that's the case. A hat tip to Bad Fox Graphics on Twitter for that. What's happening here? Ah, yes. I always love it when this happens because I don't know exactly why. I don't know. Maybe it's humanizing. Although it's so difficult to humanize Britt Hume. It's humanizing for some people, and for others, I guess it's just an exposure of hypocrisy. But fair warning to those of you who might decide to do something like this. Britt, I guess, watching some news happening online and decided to share it with everybody, and I'm sure in a snide and sniping fashion. Let's see. Well, not too bad. He's letting everybody know as of 5:37 this morning that he had been reading the news on, I'll have to get real close to the screen to see if I can figure out what he was actually reading. I guess the Fox News website. Anyway, Biden now clear favorite in betting odds as of 5:30 a.m. Tuesday is what he's telling us. And, yeah, I can't see the tag on the tab he's actually looking at, which is just election betting odds by Maxim Lott, maybe, and John Stossel, who should never have to listen to under any circumstances. And the tab he's looking at, of course, Democratic primary, U.S. presidency chances of winning, Republican primary chances of winning, now has 49.8% chance of winning, I guess, at the betting sites for Biden. That was the news he was looking to deliver. The news he wasn't looking to deliver necessarily was the news of his having used a screen capture to show you what was going on the elections betting odds tab that he was looking at, and not cropping the picture such that his other open tabs weren't visible. I think you know where this is leading, and I guess the news is that if you zoom in on that one, The URL reveals that in addition to looking at, let's see, can I read all the rest of this stuff? I wonder if I can. I'm very curious to see what other more mundane tabs might actually be open. Maybe I can get a bigger picture here. No, I guess not. So, too bad for me. I would love to, or maybe I can look at the picture in preview and magnify it. Anyway, the point is that among the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabs that he had open, right in the middle here, not just the election betting odds, but also the Sexy Vixen vinyl set being offered on what website might this be? I don't know. I don't recognize it, but maybe you do. Looks like a very attractive set, for those who are into sexy vinyl, but more power to you. Brit Hume, I guess. Enjoy if you like in consensual fashion. The vinyl goddess halter bra. Plus, of course, the very, I'm sure, comfortable looking vinyl, like I guess that would be like boy shorts style underwear as well. And quite honestly, it just feels humid, really. Too humid for a set like that. It also has long elbow length gloves, not to mention a lot of metal or perhaps faux metal studding, some zippers, really honestly, zipper in a place that I think cries out danger, to be honest. But, there are, of course, things you can do to make that less dangerous, but that's really your business. If you are interested in Sexy Vixen vinyl set, the whole matching set, there's just, certain hygiene practices, I guess I would imagine are recommended for maximizing the upside of such a set, let's say, versus running into trouble with it, the kind of trouble you just don't need. And frankly, no one does, except Brit does. So we may know more about Brit Hume now than we needed to. And in fact, we may know more about Brit Hume's significant or possibly relatively insignificant other, and what their habits may be or what's in their future. We learned a lot. Thank you, Bobby Lewis, for doing that. This is a morning show, and I guess we'll move on from there. But it's always funny when they do that. So hint, word to the wise, if you ever use a screenshot, you should routinely crop out any identifying information at all, by the way. I crop out even how much battery is left on my phone if I'm doing that, or all the tabs. Just please, for your own good, for all of our sakes, remember to cut that out. Just cut it out is all I'm asking you. All right. That was an unexpected turn. Speaking of things closer to home, let's say, I think I'll remind everybody that one of the things that's going on during today's primaries, some states are actually, I think, being smart, even though it's a little early for this stuff, but being smart and holding their primaries for other federal offices today, along with their presidential primary, and who knows, perhaps even primaries for state or local office. But this brings us to Texas, where, believe it or not, they're being smart about this. And I am reminded by a story in New York Magazine that today would be primary day in all the congressional races, but including Texas's 28th congressional district, where very conservative incumbent Democrat Henry Cuellar is running for re-election and is being challenged by, as it says here in the title of the piece, a 26-year-old progressive who may defeat one of Congress's most conservative Democrats. We're talking about the conservative Democrat, of course, being Henry Cuellar. By the way, endorsed by, it says here, the Koch-funded Libre Initiative Action. I don't know what that is, but if it's Koch-funded, we know something about that. The primary challenger, Jessica Cisneros. So don't forget about the down ballot races today. Some states will have them primary wise, and you should be paying attention to it. Do remember, if you haven't voted yet and your state is voting today, get a hold of a sample ballot. If you don't want to get a hold of it at the door from the people passing out literature, you can find them online. Study them. Make sure you know what's going on. Make sure you know what you're facing, and you enter the voting booth ready to go. So, interesting story, and just a good reminder about who she is and what she's about, and why it's important to clear out some of the really reactionary, super conservative Democrats and replace them with more progressive ones. And now's a good time to do that. So, just wanted to remind you that that's in the offing. All right, poking around here. We'll see what else we've got to share, but our first break is already coming up, and that's because we spent too much time on Brit Hume and his preference for sexy vinyl. But it's out there, and honestly, I could do with the distraction at this point. All right, well, got a great Paul Krugman entry to throw into the mix, particularly if we're going to talk a little bit more about the coronavirus situation and meld it with the political situation so we can make a transition to some of the more important stories to which I can perhaps actually speak directly. I'm reluctant to speak too much about anything more than generalities about the coronavirus without Greg around. And for that matter, I guess today's challenger primaries that are super important without Joan around. Perhaps she'll want to comment on that Cisneros race after all. We'll save that all for later and leave the door open for their discussions. Greg tomorrow, Joan later today, and me 2 minutes from now. Hang on. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Networks Radio. People are demanding more information about Brit Hume. No one is demanding this, of course. I should check. I mean, maybe somebody is, but I'd love to be able to blame it on them. But no, I don't think anybody is demanding more information. But I wanted to zoom in and see what else was open. And clearly, there was nothing else interesting besides the Sexy Vixen vinyl set, but it's made me curious. And it looks like there were 6 tabs open, and now I understand what was going on. I did see the other day. By the way, if you haven't seen so far and you are a fan of Twitter's own Darth is back from hibernation. I did notice that just the other day. And I saw a tweet this morning from Darth that just said, imagine only having 6 tabs open on your browser, though. Perhaps even more interesting than the Sexy Vixen vinyl set is just having 6 tabs open. I only wish that were the case here. But yeah, it looks like there's a 6th tab open. You can't really tell. I was just sort of curious, what other things might he be doing at 5:30 in the morning besides the Sexy Vixen vinyl set? And I think, computer security really something clearly that he's going to have to spend some more time on. He must have done it on his phone because I see he's got 93% battery life there and pretty good strong signal. But he's also got open tabs, something on coronavirus. That seems good. He's clearly over at the betting odds something. I don't know what that site is. The Sexy Vixen vinyl thing is circled in red here, of course. But then there's, I guess the first tab is SunTrust Online, and then it looks like maybe maybe it might be like access your PIN or something like that. It doesn't show his banking PIN number or anything like that, but it does. I mean, why would you want well, you wouldn't. I mean, it was a mistake, but don't let anybody know that if you're a famous person, particularly a famous person that somebody might hate for stupid reasons, where your bank account is, because who knows what can result from that. Does anybody have a legitimate reason to need to know that that Brit Hume is banking at SunTrust? I mean, only bad things can come from that. All right. Well, there's a lot of bad news out there. And I'm being reminded of it as I'm looking at Twitter on the phone here, but I guess we'll put that away and get to the more relevant news of the day. I had some ideas about what those relevant pieces of news might be. Let's check in on, oh my God, please got to get rid of this. I got the two computers running, and now the sexy vinyl thing is still up here. And so I guess, who knows? Maybe he saw somebody else looking at it and he said, "What's that?" It's not primarily his interest. Maybe we're assuming too much. All right. Moving on here. I told you that Paul Krugman had put together a nice piece on paranoid politics goes viral. What's happening in this, his March 2nd piece? A photo of stores, I guess, what is this? Denuded of large sizes of hand sanitizer and I guess face masks as well, all emptied off the shelves, though they have plenty of small, like pocket or purse size hand sanitizer available, including brand name Purell, the hand sanitizer that doesn't pay this show, but could and should now that we've announced their name. I don't know. I thought we'd give it a try. Selling out is very difficult, as it turns out. Anyway, Paul Krugman, who totally did not sell out, I think, says, "We still don't know how much damage COVID-19," and this is great. I love it because he's a guy after our own hearts in terms of detail. "We don't know how much damage COVID-19, the coronavirus disease," get it, right? Will do, but it's reasonable to be very concerned. After all, it appears to be highly transmissible, and it is probably a lot more lethal than the ordinary flu. But not to worry, say right-wing pundits and news organizations. It's all a hoax, a conspiracy by the liberal media to make Donald Trump look bad. Administration officials and Trump himself have echoed their claims. These claims are, of course, crazy. Thank you. Among other things, COVID-19 is a global phenomenon with major outbreaks ranging from South Korea to Italy. Are the South Korean and Italian media also part of a conspiracy to get Trump? Maybe. He doesn't even bother saying maybe, but you never know. This craziness was, however, entirely predictable to anyone who has been following right-wing politics. It's just the latest battle in a long-running war on truth, on the very idea that there exists an inconvenient objective reality. In the case of COVID-19, the usual suspects were, in part, engaged in projection. After all, they themselves engaged in a concerted effort to politically weaponize the 2014 Ebola outbreak against Barack Obama, whose response was in reality smart and effective. By the way, in the aftermath of that outbreak, the Obama administration put in place measures to deal with future pandemics, like this one, which at the time was a future pandemic, but is now a current pandemic, all of which Trump scrapped. Because Obama, of course. We all know that being the reason. But as I said, meaning Paul Krugman, virus denial is just the latest battle in a long-term war on truth. Remember, conservatives have spent decades denying the reality of climate change, insisting that it's a gigantic hoax. Everything's a hoax with these guys, perpetrated by a vast international scientific conspiracy. And as the signs of climate catastrophe multiply from wildfires in Australia to drought in California, climate denial has only strengthened its grip on the GOP. On the eve of the 2018 midterms, a survey found 73% of Republican senators, it's easy to do percentages with senators, denying the scientific consensus that man-made climate change is happening. Or consider how many on the right reacted after their dire predictions of hyperinflation under Obama failed to pan out. Not by admitting that they were wrong, but by insisting that the numbers were being cooked. And I'm not talking about fringe figures. I'm talking about people conservatives consider leading intellectuals. And I remind you that one of the so-called conservative intellectuals, a minor conservative intellectual, who is valued for his continuing never Trumpism, Matt Lewis, spent his time on the air, really on the website, the CNN.com blogger bunch, as they used to call it, so that they could dismiss our opinions outright by, putting us together under this cute, stupid name. Matt Lewis, level-headed, never-Trumper Matt Lewis, leading Republican intellectual, etc., spent his time debating the Affordable Care Act with me and others, screaming that everyone should be Googling the name of Ezekiel Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother, because he was inserting secret death panel provisions into the Affordable Care Act, and all your grandmothers were going to be killed. Now, if any of them are still alive, you might take note of that, and also take note of the fact that he was wrong. But he was as much a screaming wacko as any of them. The fact that he also doesn't like Trump is not much of a redeeming factor. I will never forget the amount of time he spent yelling over me. Google Ezekiel Emanuel, you'll find out. Google him, Google it. Yeah, so, meanwhile, telling no one how to spell it, and that's a major part of insisting that people Google things. Anyway, now our Paul Krugman piece continues. Now, this kind of conspiracy theorizing isn't exclusively the province of the right. And here he insults lots of people. Are you ready? You can, for example, see some similar tendencies, is very gently put, but it's not going to go over well. See some similar tendencies in Bernie Sanders' team. That's what it says here. It was dismaying to find a senior Sanders advisor declaring that all those disagreeing with proposals for a wealth tax, which, by the way, I support, says Paul Krugman, are the types of groups and academics that are funded by the powers that be, the establishment, the billionaire class. The thing is, while corruption by big money does happen, it's the main force keeping zombie ideas alive, for instance. It doesn't lie behind every policy dispute. Sometimes serious analysts just disagree, and it's worrying that some of the Sanders people can't tell the difference. Thankfully, others can. I will add that. But the right is where the paranoid style goes hand in hand with real power and can do real damage. Indeed, it can be deadly. This is obvious when it comes to climate change, where conspiracy theory-fueled denial plays a big role in blocking action and hence poses an existential threat to civilization. At first, it wasn't clear whether the right-wing paranoia was also hampering the response to COVID-19, but recent reporting makes it clear that one major reason the U.S. has lagged far behind other countries — we're number one, everyone — have lagged far behind other countries in testing for the coronavirus, an essential step in containing its spread, was that Trump didn't want to believe that there was a crisis. After all, recognizing that we face a serious problem might hurt his beloved stock market. And I don't think he's even really heavily invested in the stock market. He just knows that successful, serious business people are very interested in the stock market, so he'll pretend to be too. This desire to minimize the danger to the market distorted the whole government response to the outbreak. Some have drawn parallels to the run-up to the Iraq War, when the Bush administration's evident desire to be given a rationale for war skewed intelligence toward seeing non-existent weapons of mass destruction. In today's case, the analysis was skewed toward not seeing a threat, and the skew was enabled in part by claims that all the evidence that there was indeed a threat was a hoax perpetrated by the liberal news media. And there is little evidence, even now, that the Trump administration is taking the reality of COVID-19 seriously. While the administration is finally asking for additional funds to fight the disease, the sums it has suggested seem grotesquely inadequate. Trump allies are already denouncing his critics for politicizing the outbreak. Donald Trump Jr. has accused Democrats of wanting to see millions die, but it was actually Trump who politicized the virus by downplaying the danger. It's true that Democrats are criticizing Trump's actions, suggesting that his refusal to accept responsibility for, well, anything, is putting America at risk. Last time I checked, however, criticizing America's leaders was still legitimate. But that's the thing about political paranoia. You see even the most normal criticism as part of a sinister conspiracy. And the fact that this kind of paranoia has infected our ruling party is scarier than any virus. And I'll accept that. I think that was well put. No surprise, of course. Many of the things he has to say are interesting and very often are well put. All right, let's see. I made oblique mention yesterday of this, I think near the top of the show, when we were talking about the general breakdown in the predictability of how our rule of law operates. And I had made mention of pending cases having to do with the validity of appointments made under the Vacancies Reform, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act by Trump and his administration, where though we did actually have a recent decision that actually sort of upheld the norms under the law. And I grabbed the story about it, but there's since been an entry written by Gabe Ortiz at Daily Kos that sums it up. And I'd rather use that, of course, because occasionally they'll take tougher digs at the Trump administration figures than the traditional news media sites are willing to do. And I always appreciate that. Judge rules anti-immigrant loudmouth Ken Cuccinelli unlawfully appointed to lead immigration services. How do you like that? Did you hear about that one? Anti-immigrant loudmouth Ken Cuccinelli was unlawfully appointed to lead U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, a federal judge decided on Saturday, ruling that, as CNN reported, Cuccinelli's appointment violated a statute that governs how most federal vacancies are filled. The decision in the lawsuit, which was launched by a number of advocacy groups on behalf of 7 asylum seekers last year, voids at least one anti-asylum policy intended to speed up the deportations of vulnerable families. Since the day Cuccinelli was hand-picked to lead an agency that's supposed to help facilitate legal immigration, even though he once compared immigrants to rodents, advocates have argued not just that this anti-immigrant goofball was wholly unqualified for the job, but also that his placement was unlawful. After Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell vowed to block Cuccinelli's confirmation for any position. Imagine that. The Trump administration did an end run around the law with the extraordinary step of creating a new office for Cuccinelli in order to install him as the acting head of USCIS, Democracy Forward, which joined with RICES, R-I-I-C-E-S, Clinic. These are 2 acronyms for immigration advocacy groups, and the law firm Proskauer Rose to sue. These groups said last year that this was kind of an awkwardly constructed thing since I interrupted in the middle, but at any rate, they filed suit last year. Among the harmful changes implemented by Cuccinelli, a failed statewide candidate to elected office in Virginia. You may remember he ran for governor at some point. Was it governor or attorney general? Maybe both. Anyway, yeah, I think he was actually attorney general successfully. Ran for governor and got clobbered. Anyway, among the harmful changes implemented by him was chopping in half the time that asylum seekers have to consult a lawyer and prepare evidence to substantiate their fear of persecution, which can leave them just a few hours to prepare for their interview, if that. The groups said in their lawsuit. When he hasn't been busy trying to deport asylum seekers faster, Cuccinelli has also been a loudmouth for the administration on cable news, supporting immigration raids and other awful crap, we'll say, that had zip to do with his job at USCIS. They couldn't get him into the kind of job where he could be a real loudmouth, but a real loudmouth enforcer with actual power at the Customs and Immigration Services. So they gave him some other job which would pay him to do something sort of about one aspect of immigration, but the title would have USCIS in it, and so he could get on TV and rant about parts of immigration that he really had no authority over, but the ones that he really wanted to talk about. That's the real end run here. Cuccinelli was also named as a defendant in a lawsuit over the Trump administration's inhumane decision to end deportation relief for sick people undergoing life-saving medical treatment, which USCIS ended without so much as a public announcement. Instead, just mailing letters to families across the country informing them their protections would be removed in 33 days. Under widespread condemnation and pressure from folks directly affected, such as Jonathan Sanchez and Maria Isabel Bueso, the administration backed off the move. Regarding the ruling from this past weekend, the plaintiffs said the court agreed with the plaintiffs that the Trump administration made an unlawful end run around the Federal Vacancies Reform Act by taking the extraordinary and unprecedented step of creating a new office for Cuccinelli in order to install him as the acting head of USCIS, finding that the structure and purpose of the FVRA further confirmed that Cuccinelli was not lawfully designated to serve. Actually, it would probably benefit from looking at one of the other articles to explain exactly what they did here, but I'm glad we have Gabe's color to add to the story here. Cuccinelli has since been appointed Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, and of course in an acting capacity, because finding confirmable candidates to be in charge of federal agencies is for competent administrations. This appointment has likewise been criticized by a number of lawmakers, including House Homeland Security Committee Chair Benny Thompson, House Oversight and Reform Committee Chair Carolyn Maloney, and members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. The CHC, in fact, is gravely concerned that DHS's top official may be serving in violation of the law. Again, the group told the Government Accountability Office Comptroller General in December, and will continue to do so until the GAO makes a determination, and you know how slow they can be. Cuccinelli doesn't belong in any office, period. Today's ruling is a big win that confirms Ken Cuccinelli's installation and service as acting director of USCIS was unlawful, Democracy Forward's Ann Harkavy said in a statement. Hope I got that name pronounced right. This is both a victory for the rule of law and a significant blow to the Trump administration's xenophobic agenda. We're proud to share this legal victory with brave asylum seekers who brought the Trump administration to court to ensure that the United States stays true to its tradition of providing a haven for those fleeing persecution and seeking asylum in America. All right, so that's the colorful explanation or retelling of what was going on. Let's see, one more, slightly more boring, but not necessarily traditional media bit of coverage, I think explains a little bit more about what was going on. I'll grab BuzzFeed News, written by Hamed Alaziz, if I've got that name correct. A judge ruled Trump's USCIS director wasn't legally appointed. A policy directive by Ken Cuccinelli that gave asylum seekers less time to prepare for initial screenings should also be voided. The judge said he didn't have the authority to make it, basically. So here's the deal. This actually puts the ruling on Sunday, but I would imagine it actually came out on Saturday. But let's see. So the ruling is Ken Cuccinelli, head of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, had not been lawfully appointed to his job, and a policy directive speeding up initial screenings of immigrants should be voided. The decision comes months after Cuccinelli was initially tapped to lead USCIS by President Trump, a move that advocates immediately said violated a relatively obscure federal statute governing selections to agency positions. The statute cited in Judge Randolph Moss's decision, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, allows the president, we've been here before, but in this case, we're talking about something that allows the president to select certain senior officials to fill cabinet and agency positions. We were last talking about the Federal Vacancies Reform Act when we were talking about, who was it? I can't even remember now offhand, but we were talking about, about Richard Grinnell, the current ambassador to Germany, who, because he's in a Senate-confirmed position right now, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act allowed the Trump administration to appoint him as acting, what did we do with him again? I can't remember. Yes, right. Acting Director of National Intelligence, also a Senate-confirmed position. And the statutes would otherwise prohibit someone who hadn't been confirmed by the Senate for some position to be moved into the position of acting anything if the permanent position likewise requires Senate confirmation. But if you move someone who's had Senate confirmation, even for a completely different job, into that acting role, that's acceptable under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, which probably by itself means that the Federal Vacancies Reform Act could use some more reforming. We really did get, there were just too many loopholes in that one. But in this case, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act is talking about a slightly different position. The FVRA allows the president to select certain senior officials to fill cabinet and agency positions. At USCIS, Cuccinelli's initial title was created by the administration. Principal Deputy Director. That's the title they gave him. Now, under the statute, the only way for Cuccinelli to have become eligible to be selected to lead the agency, which is what he was doing in effect, they made him Principal Deputy Director, which doesn't require Senate confirmation, but then claimed that he was the highest ranking official in the agency. And so, because the agency had no official no official head, they basically said, well, he's the highest ranking person there, so he'll obviously be considered the acting head of USCIS. And these folks sued because they were correct in pointing out, no, the head of USCIS has got to be Senate confirmed, and you can't have an acting capacity USCIS head who isn't Senate confirmed just because he occupies the position which the Federal Vacancies Act would normally point to as being allowed to move into the acting head job in the absence of a permanent official there. Under the statute, the only way for Cuccinelli to have become eligible to be selected to lead the agency in an interim fashion was to be deemed a first assistant. That's what the law says, that if you're looking for somebody to step in as an acting role, you would be looking to the first assistant to the agency head. He did not hold that title. He held something different. That's problem number one. And it's not just a problem of having the wording of the title being different in the literal sense. Moss said the creation of the title that they gave to Cuccinelli did not meet the necessary legal standard. On the merits, the court concludes that Cuccinelli was not lawfully appointed to serve as acting director, and that as a result he lacked authority to issue the reduced time to consult and prohibition on extensions directive, Moss wrote. The judge acknowledged that an assistant title can cover a range of duties, citing the iconic dispute from The Office, for instance, about whether Dwight Schrute was assistant regional manager or assistant to the regional manager. But in either of those interpretations, the assistant was a subordinate, while Cuccinelli was leading USCIS, Moss said. Cuccinelli may have had the title of Principal Deputy Director, and the Department of Homeland Security's Order of Succession may designate the office of the Principal Deputy Director as the first assistant to the director, but labels without any substance cannot satisfy the FVRA's default rule under any plausible reading of the statute. Because he wasn't legally appointed, Moss said a directive issued by Cuccinelli in July must be set aside. Asylum officers previously had to wait at least 48 hours after an immigrant had been detained for crossing into the U.S. to interview them and to hear their case. However, under the July directive issued by Cuccinelli, that window was reduced to 1 calendar day, according to a policy change released to staffers and obtained by BuzzFeed News. The new policy also made it so immigrants could not reschedule their interview unless there were extraordinary circumstances. By Sunday evening, the ruling had also already made an impact at USCIS. Senior officials at the agency emailed asylum officers across the country to let them know the directive instituted by Cuccinelli in July was no longer operative. Consultation periods were to be extended back to at least 48 hours, and the extensions would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. In an initial screening, by the way, called a credible fear interview, immigrants must prove there is a significant possibility that they have a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country. In the time before the interview in custody, immigrants consult with attorneys or others to help them prepare. The ruling could mean the end of USCIS policies put forward by Cuccinelli, but it won't have a broader impact on most recent actions by the Trump administration on immigration. It's a significant ruling about the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, but one that may be limited in its broader impact. Although any directives signed only by Cuccinelli are now vulnerable to legal challenge, the ruling won't affect other policies adopted by those higher on the food chain at DHS, according to Steve Vladeck, professor at the University of Texas Law School, and who follows these issues very closely. All right, we'll be right back after this break with more. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. You know, it occurred to me, I was wondering about this, but as it turns out, we have actual calls for this, for instance, from Twitter user Absinthe, and from the Twitter friend who passed this story along. Let me open it all up here so we can make sure we got it right. But yes, this was sent along to us by Buddha Protocol, who actually uses the non-address handle of Mega Church Pastor. But both have said what was missing, of course, from the reading of this story was our acting sound effect, right? So Ken Cuccinelli, our acting head of the USCIS. And we do miss that occasionally from time to time. And why? Because acting is so brilliant. Acting! Brilliant! Thank you! Thank you! Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for reminding me. But does everybody see what exactly was going on? I guess we can boil that story down a little bit for the process and procedure nerds among us. What the real serious problem here was, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act didn't contemplate this much gaming, I guess. But we should anticipate all sorts of gaming from the Trump administration at this point. So they wanted, or I guess you could say, Trump wanted Ken Cuccinelli to head the Customs and Immigration Service because he knew Ken Cuccinelli was the kind of anti-immigrant bigot who would do his bidding and make cruelty the point at USCIS. But for whatever reason, because Mitch McConnell hates Ken Cuccinelli, or hates something about him anyway, and refused to confirm him to head USCIS, which would ordinarily require Senate confirmation, they basically said, well, I need a way to install him, I guess, at least on a temporary basis as acting head of the USCIS. Now, that can happen if you are the, what did they say, first deputy In other words, if you have a Senate-confirmed head of the USCIS, I'm not 100% certain that the first deputy would necessarily require Senate confirmation. That is sometimes the case. But if you don't have anybody in that position, what you are not supposed to be able to do is install somebody in that position when there's no Senate confirmed head of USCIS or any other agency in place. So what they basically did, though, they had no one heading USCIS and no first deputy. They said, we want Ken Cuccinelli to be the head of USCIS, but the Senate won't go along with it. So what we'll do is we'll make him the first deputy. And then say, oh, look, there's also no confirmed head of USCIS. I wonder what we're going to do. Well, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act says the first deputy steps in this case, as acting head of USCIS. And so we'll just do things that way. And the judge, I think quite correctly, held here, no, this isn't what the Federal Vacancies Reform Act was about. You are permitted to move the first deputy into the acting head role because the first deputy is presumed to be someone with some experience on the job and some grounding in what's going on, and it makes sense to have that person serve in an acting capacity until you get your permanent selection confirmed by the Senate. And the assumption under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act was that you were going to try to get someone installed as a Senate-approved head of the agency. But if you don't have any intention of doing that, but rather just create someone as what you claim to be first deputy and move them into the head of the agency in an acting capacity, and you just plan to leave them there and never pursue Senate confirmation for anyone, that just doesn't work under the spirit of the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. The other gaming, of course, that's going on is with Richard Grinnell, who, what we've found out is he's been moved in an acceptable fashion, something we accept under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, at least to date, moving a Senate-confirmed person from one job to another Senate-confirmed job, even in an acting capacity. But the Federal Vacancies Reform Act and whatever preceded it, I guess, limits the ability of the person to serve in that acting capacity. And I don't even remember what how it sets the limit in terms of the number of days. But we learned from this situation that if you move someone into that position in an acting capacity, but then do, in fact, nominate someone to take that position on a permanent basis, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, in seemingly a sensible concession, says that the other person can remain in the job in an acting capacity until you get the person you named to the permanent position confirmed by the Senate. In other words, a foot-dragging Senate shouldn't be allowed to prevent a sitting president from having someone of his choice run the administration or the agency in an acting capacity until, the Senate actually gets around to doing their work. They can't drag their feet and therefore cripple the agency. But what they didn't really anticipate, I don't think, was the possibility that the president would intentionally nominate someone who most observers insist had no chance of confirmation, in order not to try and force the person through and have a showdown with the Senate necessarily, but rather just to trigger the clause of the Federal Vacancies Reform Act that extends the period during which the head of the agency can continue in that capacity. I think we've had enough of the acting sound effect. Now everybody's satisfied by that one? That's not the only reason I tried to explain this to you. But yeah, you're not supposed to be able to manipulate it this way. And I don't know whether there's grounds for a similar case based on this decision, but at least it kind of opens the door to reinterpreting the Federal Vacancies Reform Act not to cover things that are clearly violations of the spirit of the law, but it's not something that all judges agree on what the spirit of the law is or whether that's even a real thing. But very interesting. So I think we mentioned who exactly we're talking about, right? Maybe it developed over the weekend after Friday's show. But I told you that Trump was in a frame of mind, if you can call it that, where he was now contemplating renominating or rehiring, where that was applicable, people who had otherwise left the administration or the administration's orbit in disgrace of some sort. Rehiring Sean Spicer, for instance. Rehiring, lots of people who had been, what was the guy's name? Who was escorted out of the White House because I can't even recall his name now. There's too many people. He was never very memorable in the first place. But escorted out of the White House having lost his ability to get a security clearance because he had severe gambling problems, now back and heading the White House Personnel Office, which is insane. But we also mentioned that John Ratcliffe, the congressman from Texas, is that right, who lost out in his bid for the nomination as Director of National Intelligence earlier in the administration because it was found that he had so vastly inflated his resume and experience, and that's the sort of thing that makes people blackmailable, and that's not a guy you want in DNI. But now Trump says he's going to renominate him. And no one is entirely sure whether he is renominating him because he's serious, because Ratcliffe was very flattering to Trump and was a rabid defender of Trump's during his impeachment. And so therefore Trump feels good about him and therefore thinks that he can force the hands of Republican senators. I'll campaign against you, or I'll turn my people loose on you if you don't confirm the guy. Is it something that rises to that level? Or is he nominating Ratcliffe to sort of semi-reward him for his loyalty during the impeachment process, with the understanding that senators are simply not going to budge on his nomination, but that if they don't budge on his nomination, it doesn't matter, because what really matters is that it triggers the provision of the Federal Vacancies Reform Act that allows Grinnell to continue serving some 210 additional days in the capacity as acting Director of National Intelligence. So very interesting. And again, gaming of the system that was not anticipated, I don't think, by the framers of the statute, who I understand, by the way, was Fred Thompson. So he, it's not that it was beyond him to have imagined such a thing, but I just think that he didn't. He just wasn't a terribly imaginative guy. But, man, he was Republican too. Maybe he was holding the door open for this sort of nonsense. You never know. All right. I found that to be an interesting point on procedure that we could share. I suppose I should now share the story. It didn't really, it just didn't click with me as a story when I read it last night. But apparently Chris Matthews has resigned from his job at Hardball on MSNBC for, I guess, a number of reasons. And maybe the last straw here was this story that appeared in GQ, of all places, over the last couple of days. But he got a lot of angry response for a number of things. No one has, people have been angry with Chris Matthews for a long time and for a lot of reasons, and some of them good and some of them fantastic. So I guess he's been rather difficult and seems really to have been left behind by the times anyway. But let's see, he was in trouble with viewers for the way he treated Elizabeth Warren a few days ago, and discussing really various matters, including allegations of sexual misconduct by male politicians. And it seemed like Matthews was just, I don't know, preternaturally inclined to believe the man in that situation, whereas Elizabeth Warren taking what I think most people still think is the more reasonable position at this point, believing the women, and not sentencing anybody to prison on one person's word, but just saying, look, there's mountains of evidence of how frequently we disbelieve women who have credible stories and damage everyone, including not just the victims, but our entire society, by not being open even to the possibility that they might be telling the truth. And he was just standing pat in the same place where we were even 5 years ago. And it was a damaging place, and it was a huge failure to understand the moment we were in. But it wasn't surprising, because Chris Matthews is stuck in the old moment and always has been, politically, personally, socially. And so people began to pile up evidence. Well, he's just retro that way, and not in a good way. And anyway, last straw perhaps may have been this story in GQ published in the last few days, I guess published on the 28th. That would be Friday. Laura Bassett, the writer, saying, like Warren, I had my own sexist run-in with Chris Matthews. And the update does in fact say, on March 3rd, 3 days after this story was published, Chris Matthews retired from MSNBC on air. And as I thought I saw tweeted earlier, he just sort of did it mid-show. And they went to commercial, and they came back, and he wasn't there. And they had Steve Kornacki sitting there instead, and that's a little wacky and wild. I'm not going to read through Laura Bassett's story. It's not all that lengthy, but it's probably something you may have read already. If not, I'll recommend it to you. I'll pass it on in today's roundup. But I guess the bigger news at this stage of the game is that she added her voice to those of other not necessarily, I don't want to say accusers, really. I mean, that's what was happening. But it wasn't that they were accusing, I don't think, him of actual sexual misconduct, but rather of a sexist bias, which, for political commentators is not really equally troubling, but troubling in its own right. And the sort of thing you would like to see eliminated from political commentary. And I guess Matthews has done us the favor of eliminating it, at least with respect to his own sexist bias. So that deserves a place in today's roundup as well. Let's see. There are a number of others other stories that I thought were worth mentioning. I didn't mention also the other day that there is now circulating, I got to make a note to go and grab this thing, circulating on Twitter some interesting footage of what appears to be a deposition, maybe in a separate civil case, a deposition of Roger Stone. And what case that might be, I am not entirely sure. I don't think, someone appeared to be saying that it was from a separate civil case, not his current criminal case before the courts in D.C., wherein he's been convicted of lying to investigators about his role in the WikiLeaks part of the Trump-Russia saga. But there's this video clip of, let's see, I first saw it here circulated by Andrew Kimmel, who says, it says now, I produce things for TV and the web, founder of Aura Nexus, former head of live video at BuzzFeed News, if that tells you anything. But there's a relatively brief clip of him just expressing such, or not even suppressing the physical part of it, but unable to suppress the clear physical manifestation of such incredible anger at the people questioning him that he's barely able to keep from, I guess, standing up and physically attacking the lawyers in this. He's gritting his teeth and grimacing, and his hands are shaking with what appears to be rage as opposed to, say, some neurological ailment. But it really was pretty incredible, and it's just amazing that he's so psychotic and that the president appears ready to pardon him and release him from prison term, any prison term to which he might be sentenced, is really just bad news all around, and I think probably would cause a lot of fear for physical safety among the lawyers who are questioning here. Though they really do needle him pretty good, including I guess Stone saying something about how, I don't know, he seems to insinuate that he was going to either get this lawyer or do something damaging to this lawyer. And the lawyer saying, well, you better hurry up, meaning, you're running out of time. Pretty soon you're going to be in prison and you're not going to be able to do it. But he really does. He moves Stone to the point of just shaking and grinding his teeth with rage. And he's not a well man. He really needs to be put in prison, perhaps for his own good. Releasing him would be a terrible idea. And there's... I guess that leads to a Politico piece that I had pocketed from the other day that was somewhat interesting in terms of a thinking through of the prospect of Trump pardoning Roger Stone from an old-timey, rules-based, hidebound sort of perspective that I think is really out the window these days. Corey Brettschneider is the writer here, a professor of political science at Brown University, visiting professor of law at Fordham Law School, writes why President Trump can't pardon Roger Stone. I would have put that probably in scare quotes. It should be expressed that way. Can't, but actually can. The Constitution and the framers sought to protect the Republic from a scenario like this. That is true, but they can't do it because they are, quote-unquote, dead and can't do anything from the grave. Speculation that President Donald Trump might pardon Roger Stone has reached a fever pitch after Stone's sentencing by a federal judge and the president's repeated hints that he thinks the verdict unfair. But fortunately, the Constitution's framers imagined this nightmare scenario: a suspected criminal president pardoning a co-conspirator, thank you for saying so, and they put in the Constitution language to legally prohibit the pardon power in exactly this kind of case. Let's see. Both the plain meaning of the Constitution's text and the historical evidence show that once a president has been impeached, he or she loses the power to pardon anyone for criminal offenses connected to the articles of impeachment, and that even after the Senate's failure to convict the president, he or she does not regain this power. I was initially interested in this because of my personal interest in playing the Republican intentional misinterpretation of the Constitution game, to read the pardon clause as being inapplicable in general to any president who has been impeached, whether he was pardoning people connected with his crimes or not. And indeed, that I thought it would be fun to interpret it as invalidating pardons issued prior to the impeachment of the president as well, just to screw with, what's his name, Eddie Gallagher? Is that the name of the war criminal Seal who was pardoned? That's right. I hope so. All right. Anyway, but this appears to be a more serious bid at making a similar claim. Under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, the President is given the, quote, power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Now, I think to date, the most popular reading of that has been that the President has the power to pardon criminal offenses against the United States that are being brought in Article 3 courts. And that, except in cases of impeachment, has traditionally, I think, been interpreted to mean you can't pardon an impeachment. That is, if you as president or your vice president or any cabinet official is being impeached, that's not a proceeding that's taking place in an Article 3 court, and you can't pardon someone such that they do not have to face impeachment. But this is another interesting interpretation, and one I'll latch onto because what the hell? Let's use it. So, under Article 2, Section 2, the President is given the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Pardons are supposed to be used as acts of mercy. The framers thought of the pardon power as a benign prerogative. Prerogative because it was mostly unchecked by the courts or Congress, but benign because presidents would use it for the public good. Well, okay, so far so good. But the framers knew not to place blind trust in the president to wield the power justly. That's why they forbade a president from exercising the pardon power in, quote, cases of impeachment. This phrase is often interpreted to mean that a president cannot use his pardon power to stop an impeachment case of someone else, or even himself, from proceeding in Congress. But the phrase should also be interpreted as preventing the worst abuse of the pardon power, an impeached president's pardoning of cronies who have been convicted of crimes related to the president's own wrongdoing. The danger of a president using the pardon power to excuse his or her own crimes was discussed by George Mason at the 1788 Virginia Ratifying Convention, where delegates debated whether to adopt the document that had been drafted in Philadelphia. Mason thought the danger of the pardon was so great that it was among the reasons he argued the Constitution should not be ratified, and why he refused to sign the document. The president ought not to have the power of pardoning because he may frequently pardon crimes which were advised by himself. It may happen at some future day, now, for instance, that he will establish a monarchy and destroy the republic. If he has the power of granting pardons before indictment or conviction, or ever, he may he not stop inquiry and prevent detection, or at least avoid punishment for those who are detected, I guess, is another question. Defenders of the Constitution knew they needed a robust response to the danger of a president's abusing the pardon to protect co-conspirators. James Madison, a primary author of the Constitution, argued in reply to Mason, he was a Virginian after all, that such pardons were barred by the Constitution as already written. He pointed to the protection already in the Constitution. No president could pardon co-conspirators. If the president be connected in any suspicious manner with any person, and there be grounds to believe he will shelter himself, the House of Representatives can impeach him. Madison responded to Mason. They can remove him if found guilty. They can suspend him when suspected. And the power will devolve on the vice president. And even that is not particularly clear to anybody, that you can suspend the president's service when he's suspected and under impeachment. Nobody moved to do anything of the sort during Trump's impeachment, of course. But this is I don't know whether this has just been generally viewed as what Madison needed to say to save the day for the Constitution in the Virginia Ratifying Convention and nothing else. People have brought that quote up quite a lot during the Trump administration. but I just haven't seen anybody else arguing for the much broader reading that when impeached, a president ought at least to lose the ability, perhaps permanently, to pardon anyone who has been convicted in an Article 3 court or faces charging in an Article 3 federal court for something connected to the impeachment. Or, and I don't even really know why you would limit it to just that, except, I guess, basing it on Madison's argument. But I think a broader argument could have and should have been had at the time. It just wasn't. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. All right. Well, we've got a little space here to continue on with this reading of the Politico piece here. It is very interesting. And not entirely out of the question, and certainly limiting things to the idea that the president actually would be prohibited from pardoning anybody charged with crimes connected to the president's own wrongdoing is easier to accept, particularly given the Madison quote, than what I would advocate for. But what the hell? I say we expand the playing field and go for the big one, and all the shocked reactions might perhaps be dampened if you were then to pull back to the position that Madison argued for, whereas if you start there, I assume they just throw up opposition to whatever you propose and just say, no, that's meaningless. So just as a negotiating tactic, I think you should start with, the president, having been impeached, is no longer able to issue pardons, and what the hell? The pardons that they have issued in the past might be invalidated, although there were one or two pardons that were actually reasonably, let's say, more benign, of the sort that were in fact intended by the founders. So maybe their position in the end is more reasonable to say, perhaps you could expand it and have a compromise position and say prior pardons are suspect, but are to be reviewed, and at some point those that are found not to be in the public interest are suspended or revoked. I don't have any idea how you'd be able to do that. There's just no mechanism by which anyone that I know of would accept review. The whole point being that the president's pardon power has been regarded as being absolute up until now. Anyway, I just thought that was a better starting point. You can retreat from it later on. Anyway, the limit on pardons for co-conspirators, we continue here, wouldn't affect many of the president's pardons. Pardoning convicted criminals like former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich might be ill-advised, but it's still permitted under this, so what I'll call the compromise position here. By contrast, pardoning longtime advisor Roger Stone would not be permitted, as his crimes relate directly to the impeachment case. Even though, of course, he would argue that it does not. Oh, great. Joan is coming in. Let's switch gears just for a moment. Good morning, Joan. How you doing on this?
Good morning.
Tuesday?
Happy Tuesday, the day I call and talk to you.
Yes, it's super, as a matter of fact, this Tuesday.
Oh, my goodness, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't involve Idaho today.
Nope,
right?
we're
Okay.
next Tuesday.
Okay. The pretty good Tuesday next time. I don't know how many states vote next time, but this one appears to be super. So
That's what they're telling
all
us.
right. Well, that's good. So not yet, I guess, a busy, frantic day on the front page, but probably the planning might be
Well,
daunting.
you know what? Yes. Although at this point we're pretty used to doing
Yeah.
it, so the planning isn't difficult.
You have the plan. They're already written. You take them out and dust them off, and okay,
Yeah.
great. And so late night for some folks, not necessarily for everyone, and then complaints I guess leaking into Wednesday and Thursday about states that are taking too long to make the count.
And this is important for people to sort of grok.
Yeah.
This is going to take a while in a lot of states. Tennessee, Nashville just had a tornado that leveled part of the downtown and killed something like 9 people.
Wow. That's unfortunate.
Tennessee's voting today.
Yeah, so
They're probably more concerned with cleaning up and dealing with injuries and deaths, and so there's Tennessee.
Looking out for more. And
for a place. You're seeing reports of other precincts where volunteers are freaking out about the potential of coronavirus, so they're not showing up. And there's just going to be additional chaos in some places, which will mean in some places we don't get results immediately.
Yeah.
So we could end up with a result that's a little unclear.
Yeah.
We may not.
All right.
We don't know. But so
wait and see, I guess. And yeah, that's an unusual mix of problems for Tennessee, which probably, it doesn't feel like the sort of state that was dedicating a lot of resources to the smooth counting of votes and processing of results necessarily. But adding in coronavirus, that's true. Elderly poll workers, very much the stereotype, and they would be more vulnerable and maybe a little overcautious in some cases. So I could see that being a problem. And I guess if you've had your phone lines knocked down by a tornado, that's not going to make things any easier for the people who do show up to get the work done.
No, and I don't know how much else of the region, how much else of Tennessee was affected. I just know that part.
Okay.
So
big population center. That's going to be an issue. We'll see if they get around it. And hopefully the damaging weather maybe is over for the day. I haven't checked the weather channel for Nashville. Not today. But just generally speaking, we wish them good luck there.
Yes.
Oof.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd hate to see anything else happen. So let's not talk about anything else happening.
Because in a situation, in a natural disaster, thoughts and prayers are appropriate.
Yes.
As opposed to man-made disasters that could be dealt with by a caring Congress and president.
Right. You can't ban tornadoes. That's just not going to happen. I mean, I guess you could try. Might as well. You know what? I say that prematurely. That might be a bill by the end of the day. You never know what Trump is going to come up with.
You could definitely pass the legislation saying hereby tornadoes are banned.
Yeah.
It just would be kind of hard to enforce.
Right. That's true. It's the teeth that are the problem. And, I mean, if it gets bad enough, and, I mean, like if it hit a Trump rally, you could bet there would be a bill the next day banning tornadoes.
Yeah.
So.
But you know what else could happen? You could have a bill, and this would be enforceable, saying, hey, the federal government's got to pick up the entire cost of treating people with coronavirus.
You could do that.
Of
that might
testing,
make sense.
of treatment, of housing, and of vaccinations when we eventually have the vaccination, which the professionals are saying is in probably a year, and which Donald Trump is promising within a few months.
Okay.
Despite the fact of the professionals telling him that can't happen. And it's this was one of the frustrating things I saw this morning. Jim Acosta reporting that his sources say, yes, Trump finally gets it. They've talked to him. They've said, sorry, this can't happen immediately like you keep saying. It just can't.
Yeah.
We're doing our best. We'll get it through as soon as we can, but it's not going to be in 2 weeks or 2 months. It's going to be a year. And so he immediately says, okay, got it. And then goes to one of his rallies and says, hey, in a couple of months, we're going to take care of you. It'll all be fine.
Yeah, all right. Well, I did get to see some of the video from the meeting going on, and they really did struggle to try to get him to stop saying, and he kept grasping at anything he could to insist, well, it could be faster. And then, yeah, I don't know. Did you see that video from yesterday's?
I missed that video.
Just incredible.
I missed that video.
And I guess he was meeting with public health officials, but also maybe representatives of the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharma people were, of course, being optimistic and saying, well, we're close for a pharmaceutical company, which they think of being close to a vaccine as something different than people who are worried about a virus and want to be vaccinated today think of as close.
Yeah.
But, he just kept, and, Dr. Fauci kept saying, look, when they say close, they mean we're talking about a year plus before we're ready to use the thing. And Trump just kept, I keep hearing like a matter of months, and I like that better. Who cares what you like? It's going to be a year to a year and a half before it's ready to use on people in a widespread, and for widespread distribution. And finally, the pharma guys were saying, well, you have to test things because, if you just start using a vaccine, you could make an illness worse. And we don't want to make it worse. You have to have testing, and testing takes time. And finally, Trump was willing to say, oh, all right. I mean, I guess that's a good idea, testing it. But
then goes out and tells his people it's going to be a couple of months.
Right, sure. I mean, and after that, at the same time, all the rest of the people in the meeting were talking to other news outlets and saying, no, I think the president gets it now. And of course, so immediately out he goes to not get it. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It can't be anything but intentional at this point.
I have no idea of his mental state.
I guess, I suppose it's either intentional or like he's so 25th Amendable that, we can't even.
And that's the scary thing. Yeah. It could be either one. We just don't know.
Right. Well, if Pence gets the coronavirus from his visit to Sarasota, maybe that'll change things.
Where he may have definitely been exposed.
Yeah, sure. Why not? It wouldn't be the first world leader, if he is a world leader, to come down with the coronavirus even after insisting that everything was okay, which is one of the funny isn't the word for it, but gosh, that's curious. Unfortunate. Yes. Even there's a little bit of a hedge on that.
Scary.
Scary, yes. It's definitely scary because it could happen to anyone. The virus doesn't care. I'm not even sure I can sign on to unfortunate about Pence getting coronavirus. It's he'll view it as unfortunate. And I'll
who would be
point.
dropped immediately as vice president, however, if he got coronavirus?
Right. Really, honestly, even if he didn't, he just has a cold. I don't want him around me. Trump and the germophobia.
Well, and being in charge of this whole thing, if it goes south, he's put himself in jeopardy anyway.
That's right. Yeah. So then we begin to wonder about who might come next and whether they've been exposed to coronavirus. We'll find out. Okay. Well,
in the meantime, wash your hands and don't go buy face masks because they're not going to help you.
And they're probably not even available where you are because of all the people who don't know that they won't help them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wash your hands.
True. I'll go do that now, and you do the rest of the show. Okay. How about that?
I don't have any of the controls, but, I'll do my best.
Well, what do you really need, honestly? Yeah. Okay, I'll stick around. That way, there's no more music to play except the ending music. And I could probably finish washing by then.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
what else
20
is
seconds. It only takes 20 seconds.
Okay. Oh, right. That's true. I'll go run the water. I need a water sound effect at the very least.
I wish I could tell you something about Super Tuesday other than, don't expect results right away.
Yes. Wash your hands after voting as well.
I don't want to get into the politics of it because they're annoying the hell out of me today.
Oh, yeah. Well, right. You'll only give yourself a headache trying to game things out. I think my final decision on what to do is I could try to do it strategically, but I can't tell you what the results are going to be, so maybe not try and do
Vote
it.
your heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way I'm just going to go because there's too many things I could do or try to do strategically, and who knows whether any of them are going to work. There's so many millions of other people doing all their voting.
Right. Vote your heart.
Yeah, I think so. And if for sports analogy people, I guess I think of the advice that NASCAR drivers give when there's a wreck in front of them and you can't see what the hell's going on, and they just say, "Hold your line, just drive. You might hit another car. You can't tell." But they're bouncing around and it's full of smoke. Just do what you were going to do. Equal chance that you come through the other side and, 50-50. But that's better than trying to second guess yourself and then getting in a wreck and saying, I should have just done what I was going to do. I don't know. That doesn't really help a whole lot. But
no, it doesn't help a whole lot.
Right. I'm going to drive.
I don't like the analogy that we're heading into a massive car crash. But,
that's basically it. You might make it through.
I will say that I am very, very, very tired of septuagenarian white men and their egos.
Yeah, well, that's true. They're prevalent in our politics, and it's difficult.
And look where we're at.
Yeah. Right. What do we say? Not all septuagenarian. I don't know. There's nothing you can do about it.
That's all you can do about it except vote your heart.
Yes, and drive to the polls at 200 miles an hour.
And drive to the polls and try to avoid the wreck.
Right. And if you see one, just keep going.
Just keep going.
I mean, unless they need your cell phone. Be nice. Okay. But if they have a coronavirus, speed away. I have no. You're gonna have to take a risk, ladies and gentlemen. That's it. All right, so we don't have to talk about the politics of Super Tuesday since we don't know where it's going to come out anyway, and there's no sense in trying to push people into voting anything other than their heart and their preference. So we can focus on other things, certainly. And
we can, loop back to coronavirus because that's something actually that Congress is looking at.
All right.
Thus far a bit inadequately, but we'll see. Mm-hmm. Maybe $7.5 billion's enough. It might be.
Okay. Is that where?
That's sort of the number it looks like they're landing on. Out of that, the health insurers, the hospitals, the nurses, pretty much the whole industry is saying, you're going to have to pony up money to do things like put people in quarantine and pay for it.
Okay.
Those people who are under observation, who might have the disease, we need to get them out of the community. We need to put them in quarantine, and we can't put them in hospitals because we need those beds for people who are really sick. But we can't have these people out there in the wild infecting other people.
Yes, right.
So they're asking for at least $1 billion from, I think it's 1.5 billion they're asking for the housing of people who need to be quarantined. Already in King County, the county is contracting to buy a motel to house people and also to buy modular housing units that they can put on public lands and in parking lots and stuff to house people.
Okay.
So that's just one thing. What that doesn't include is the cost to these people of having to provide child care if they have children, their lost wages from not being able to go to work.
Yeah.
This is potentially going to be very economically devastating for people who get sick or who might even just think they're sick and can't go to work and don't have paid leave.
Right.
So behind that, Elizabeth Warren has another plan that's not going to happen, but it's a smart one. It's $400 billion to cover all of that.
Oh, wow. That would really be something. Yeah, I mean, it really does.
It would be wonderful if we had a far thinking. What's the word I'm trying to come up with, Kagro? People who looked ahead like she does.
Okay, yeah, well, far-ranging vision, and yes, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's going to become necessary. I mean, the amount of money that would be. I'm glad they're talking about more, and they're giving some thought to the idea of where to house people. But yeah, there's so much more that's going to be necessary. That's outside of the sorts of things that the federal government usually pays for, and it's going to make, we're going to rediscover our fiscal conservatives out there.
We definitely are, and it's going to cost lives.
Yeah. And it occurred to me today, I guess this too is another reason to think back to perhaps the one best moment of Alan Grayson's career, reminding everybody that the Republican healthcare plan is don't get sick, but if you do get sick, die quickly so that we don't have to pay to house you or deliver food to your home or pay your lost wages. You're just dead and out of the way.
And we don't have a place to put you away from your family.
Right. Yeah.
When you get sick, so that they all get sick.
Right. Yeah. And then they carry that to their workplaces, and all the pandemic things that Greg always warned us about that we don't necessarily think about, like what if everybody at the water treatment plant gets the flu or the coronavirus all at the same time, and now the rest of you don't have clean water to work with during your quarantine or hiding out from others, so that you don't get the illness yourself, or everybody at the electric power company gets it.
I'll just say at this point, they're not predicting that you lose water and power. So
No.
If you're preparing, it doesn't hurt to have batteries and water, but
yes, I'm sure disruptions will only be slight anyway. Because they would realize, nobody showed up for work today. We may be under capacity for the first 3 hours of our shift, but we'll find others. In all likelihood.
So don't get too panicked on that one yet.
Right. That's true.
Although it never hurts to have some water and batteries around.
Well, that's why they tell you to do it. You don't think about these things, or who will and won't show up to work where. Yeah. So, all right. We're all doomed. I mean, I think we can just say it right now.
We're all doomed.
But do vote before you're doomed, I guess. We'll say that. We would be even more doomed if you didn't.
We would.
And the chances of getting coronavirus while voting, I think,
are probably pretty slim. Just, slim. Once you voted, wash your hands.
Right. Yeah. Oh, definitely do that. And I mean,
don't touch your face while you're voting.
True.
Don't shake hands with anybody while you're voting.
You shouldn't be doing that anyway. You're supposed to be alone.
Yeah, let's just stop shaking hands. This is a really good opportunity to end that cultural thing.
It is a weird one. And given that, as I understand it, the original intent of handshaking was to show that you didn't have a weapon or poison or anything of the sort, and you were no threat to the other person. If handshaking now makes you the threat to the other person, we would want to get rid of that. Maybe I misunderstand the provenance, but yeah. So we'll get rid of that one and keep that one gone. But in the meantime, yes, wash your hands. Vote alone. Oh, another good reason to get rid of caucuses, by the way. There's just got to be germ fests, right? Forget that.
We may finally see the end of caucuses.
Yes.
I think finally they're over, and I hope that we get somebody at the head of the DNC who says, okay, we're done also with letting New Hampshire and Iowa go first.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, once you tear down the caucus thing, and then I guess then you have to, then you're forced into a competition that Iowa and New Hampshire, if either one of them wants to maintain that, they'll be just fighting with one another. And maybe the best thing to do is to send them both to their rooms, no matter who started it. and say, right. So the third child gets to go first this time.
It's just ridiculous. It's 2020 and this is ridiculous. It's completely made up stuff. Tradition can be changed. Just like you don't have to shake hands anymore. You don't have to have Iowa and New Hampshire go first. Because there isn't a reason for it anymore.
Yeah, if you're not shaking hands, what's the point of, I don't know. What do they do most of in Iowa and New Hampshire? They love the retail politics, right? So what happens?
Yep.
You go to
lots
diners.
of handshaking there.
Yeah, right around everybody's food.
Before coronavirus hit.
That's right. So this is also a good argument for vote by mail, etc. Just everybody stay away from everybody else.
People stop picking your babies to see politicians to be kissed. That's
kind of gone by the
wayside. They're little germ factors anyway. So yeah.
And didn't that come up in one of the more recent elections where somebody was not kissing a baby, and then it was, and people said, "Wow, how could you not kiss the baby?" And people said, "It's not good for babies."
It's not good for babies. Don't bring your baby.
And people said, "Oh yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense." That's true. So now I don't know what. Write a nice note to the baby. And stay away. But yeah, retail politics would be a coronavirus factory if you really stop and look at it. So
yeah.
Another good reason. Make a very populous state where that is only minimally, you're only going to be able to meet a very small percentage of the population. Would you make them first, and maybe that discourages it. We're doing it for sanitary reasons. Don't be insulted, Iowa and New Hampshire. This is just good public health.
I don't think they'll buy it.
No, probably not. But, by the way, that butter cow can't be really very good for,
That's a heart attack waiting. That's several hundred heart attacks waiting to happen.
If they eat it. And that's another problem, if they actually use the butter. I assume they throw that butter out. What a waste.
I would think that the butter would kind of spoil by the end of the fair. So, yeah.
So it's another issue all by itself.
How do you dispose of all of that?
I don't know.
So many issues, Kagro, so many issues. Did you cover yesterday the Supreme Court deciding to take the Affordable Care Act case?
We made mention of it, but we could use some more additional discussion of it, certainly. Though our time is limited.
Spend as much time as you are thinking about the presidential campaign as working to get a Democratic Senate.
Yes.
This is what I have to say, because this was a ridiculous case from the outset. The only way it didn't get laughed out of court was because it was heard by a Republican judge, and because the circuit that then heard the challenge is just as Republican and activist and extremist.
Yeah. Well, everyone should have the courts on their mind when they're doing their voting, and not just for president, but the place where they actually approve the judges and justices of the Supreme Court, for sure. The Affordable Care Act, you're in trouble, girl. Watch out, you're in danger. So they do continue on with this thing, even though, lots of things that were supposed to be laughed out of court are still there.
Yes. Like the Louisiana abortion case of requiring doctors have admitting permissions within 30 miles of their practice. Doctors who are performing abortions just in case the women need to be in the hospital, which is ridiculous because this doesn't happen, but also because the Supreme Court denied Texas's effort to do this just 2 years ago. They brought the same case back because there are 2 Trump members on the Supreme Court now.
Yeah. Well, things could come out differently, I suppose. But also, they have to have a habit of doing these things and saying, well, I'm Louisiana. That case says Texas. They just don't recognize the applicability of the precedent.
No, they want to take another shot at it because there are now 2 Trump justices on the court.
Yes. Well, that's probably the more sensible reason for it.
Maybe spend as much time as you're thinking about the presidential election to spend on the Senate. So
I agree.
There,
Okay.
that's what I'll leave you with this week. And, let's see what happens tonight.
Yes.
Day at Daily Coast to see the results come in, and
Yeah, that'll be the place. And they
come
have...
back with the next stage.
Right.
The final results.
And then do it again next week as well. So,
Yeah.
All right, we're up for that. A robust backbone behind the Daily Coast election coverage, and some extra capacity perhaps for people to keep checking in and refreshing their browsers every few minutes, and certainly a good reward at the end of doing that. Great analysis from Joan and the Daily Coast elections team, the famous elections team. Thanks very much for reminding us of that. And,
You're welcome.
Good luck to all of us, and we'll be talking to you again next week and wishing you good luck with your own voting. Thanks, Joan. Take care.
From Daily Coast Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, stay tuned now for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. I once again burned up all my time for telling you all the fantastic things he has in store for you, but I assure you, you'll be taking a fabulous and valuable trip around world and international news as well as our domestic mess, so please stay tuned.